Welcome to the Happiest Hour Live, everybody, where no matter where you are right now, if things are wonderful or if things are challenging, every week we strive to help make life just a little bit better. My name is Dan Lerner.
And I am Dr. Schlechter.
And together over the past 8 years, we have taught the science of happiness to over 6,000 students at New York University. And the Happiest Hour Live came about in great part thanks to these students. Just last month, while we were teaching our first Zoom class for NYU, there was so much wonderful interaction and so many students asking if we could gather more often that Alan and I realized it could be really helpful and meaningful and a lot of fun to share it all with the broader audience. So, with the generous support of the Krame Center for Mindful Living, each week we invite a renowned expert and author to discuss how you might live a more fulfilling life. Now, this show is about you as an individual, you as a community, you seeking to live a more fulfilling life. So, while we'll kick it all off, the chat box is open. Chat with one another, chat with us. And we used to say, wait till the latter half to ask questions, but now we just say ask questions anytime you want. This hour is whatever you need it to be. So we want you to be an essential part of every minute of it.
Can people hear Dan? Everybody's hearing him well? All right, good.
All right. So, is anyone not hearing me well, actually? Hopefully we're good. Okay. Speaking of needs, I'm good. Thank you, Carolyn. Speaking of needs, by the way, aside from needing to hear me, while we're happy to bring this show to you free of charge, we encourage you to go to the registration page afterwards and donate even $5 to No Kid Hungry, a not-for-profit group feeding less hungry kids. Now, we are particularly thrilled to welcome this week's guest, Mr. Jonathan Fields. We are not thrilled only because he is the executive producer and host of one of the world's top podcasts, Good Life Project, that the Wall Street Journal has named one of the top self-development podcasts. We are not only thrilled because he is featured in publications including the New York Times, Fast Company, Entrepreneur, Forbes, Inc., CNN, The Guardian, O Magazine, and many, many more, most importantly, Vogue. And we're not only thrilled because he's an award-winning and best-selling author, having written How to Live a Good Life and Uncertainty, turning fear and doubt into fuel for brilliance. We are thrilled to welcome him, I think primarily for these reasons, but really because he's our friend. All that fancy stuff, the writing, the notoriety, the time in prison we won't mention, all of that stuff is kind of icing on the cake. I met Jonathan about 10 years ago, and I introduced him to Alan maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I can't remember how we met, but when. It was like instant, wonderful friend. Since then, we have cultivated our friendship in many ways, including a very exacting way, which is monthly breakfasts over an overwhelming amount of lox, bagels, cream cheese, and sentences that end like this. So, one of the things that I love most about him, and now I should talk like this, is that he has wonderful judgment without being judgmental. I've run some incredibly stupid ideas by Jonathan, and yet he makes me feel like they're wonderful, how shall I say, starting points. So seriously, it's a pleasure to welcome a guy who brings as much creativity as he does business seichel, as he does brilliance, as he does heart, as he does friendship. So welcome to the show, Jonathan Fields.
I don't even know how to respond to that. So I'm going to just say thank you very much. Excited to just spend some time with you and everybody tonight and see what kind of fun and interesting and maybe valuable conversations we can strike up.
Well, I think we're going to definitely have fun. Interesting. We'll go for valuable too. So listen, speaking of valuable and interesting, you and I, we all spoke beforehand, and we talked about a question that might be that might be a good one to kick it off with. Usually on the show, we talk about what people are looking for out of this hour, what would be good for them. And so just keeping in mind for a moment, and we'd love to hear from everybody, keeping in mind that Jonathan has written books both about uncertainty and about how to live a good life. If this show is exactly what you needed right now, what would the outcome be for you? What would you walk away with at the end of this hour? And if you'd like to go ahead and share in the text box, that would be fantastic. How to live better in uncertainty. The benefit of uncertainty, extra energy, or magic spell. Magic spell is always nice.
Magic spell is very good.
I know, right?
Jonathan?
You make uncertainty disappear? Poof.
Yeah, I have a lot of spells actually. It requires a lot of trust though, so we'll see how we go.
Are you going to saw somebody in half?
Not again. The first time in the prison sentence after, just not good.
Well, we all learn our lessons, don't we?
We do.
Yeah. I made people disappear. Didn't work out for me either.
Ooh, I love the Harry Potter reference, Ernesto. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Wingardium Leviosa to the uncertainty. Indeed. Daily best to-dos. Oh, I like that. Oh, excellent. So be able to walk away with really things that we can do immediately. Yeah, fantastic.
You know, I think such a theme has been, last week we had a wonderful speaker talk about the science of meaning and really break down meaning in a very concrete way. And maybe it might be helpful, somebody just said, having some of the science behind uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
Thinking about how you understand uncertainty, because you really, what was so wonderful about your book is you turn uncertainty on its head and think about it in a very novel way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to jump in there because I think sometimes we talk about uncertainty in different ways. So not that this would be a universal way to look at it or to define it, but kind of the way I look at it is a little bit different also because I tend to be very focused on the possibility side of uncertainty, which most people don't get to. So when I think about uncertainty, it's usually in the context of the opportunity to either make a decision or take an action. And that's usually where most of us grapple with it. If we just have to sit with it, we're generally okay. If we experience uncertainty, which would be less than perfect information in the face of the requirement to take an action or make a decision where the stakes are significant and meaningful, and the risk of loss is there, the exposure to judgment is there. Those are sort of like the fundamental components of uncertainty when we talk about it in a meaningful way, because like I said, if you just don't know, but you don't have to do anything about the fact that you don't know, who cares? It's not a big deal. But if you don't know, and somebody says you have to, you know, if you're a student, you know, or you're in a class, right? And somebody says, you know, your grade will either go up 2 letter grades or down 2 letter grades based on the next action you take or decision you make. And you feel like you don't have enough information to take that action or make that decision. Well, then the stakes are really high, assuming you care about your grades, which not everybody does. Somebody said, you know, like the mortgage for your house, if it's a life and death stakes, you know, this goes up. What's kind of fascinating to me also is that when we read about other people making these decisions, we love it. Every thriller out there, every action picture out there is about somebody who's put in this position and we cannot get enough of it. When we are the person who's faced with taking an action or making a decision in the face of high stakes and imperfect information, as a general rule, it crushes us. But I think it's really important in describing that one side of the coin is also to really understand that uncertainty cannot exist without possibility. They're literally 2 sides of the same exact coin. What I mean by that is that when there is uncertainty, there's also opportunity, because if you had absolute certainty, then you would know what the outcome of everything is going to be, right? Which for safety reasons, for health reasons, sure, we want to get as close to that as possible. In the bigger context of our lives, you know, is this person who I'm about to walk up to at a dinner party, who I feel somehow drawn to, going to be okay with me or not? You know, is this job opportunity going to work out or not? Is this investment, whatever it may be? If we eliminate the uncertainty, then we also eliminate the possibility. You know, because the only way we can know is if we've done it before, someone else has done it before, or basically when you remove all the variables, you remove the bad feelings, but you also remove all of the possibility of what might happen should you step into that place of taking action or making a decision in this container of I don't know. So we can avoid the unease of uncertainty and the anxiety and the angst by trying to lock down everything around us and removing uncertainty from the equation. But when we lock down everything that would be part of uncertainty, we also lock ourselves out of any sense of opportunity or possibility. And we don't realize that we're doing that when we make those choices. So I think it's, when we dance with the idea of uncertainty, we're always so focused on trying to feel better because it makes us feel bad. But what we don't often think about is that at the same time, the decisions that will make us feel better in the short term because we can't handle the physiological and psychological things that we're going through may actually dial down those feelings, but at the same time, it may close a lot of doors in our lives. That was a really long answer.
That was a wonderful answer.
Was. Well, it's interesting because, I think almost every week, well, many of the weeks we talked about that possibility has the flip side. Very first week we talked Dan Tomasulo, who talked about hope, saying it's the only emotion that requires challenge, that requires conflict in order to be there, right? To rise up. And it's not, for uncertainty, you're flipping it around to say, look, there's possibility over here, right? This is why uncertainty's here. So how do you take advantage of that? What do you do to sort of find that place where, especially right now, where there's so much uncertainty, how do we make something of that?
Yeah. So the most common approach is to try and lock everything down. It's about control. How do I control every variable that's around me, right? Because if I feel like I have an inner locus of control, meaning I have the ability to control my circumstances, my inner world, my outer world, then everything is going to be okay and it won't feel this way anymore. But again, when we do that, we also shut down possibility. So the real way to actually flourish, like we talk about PERMA, right? But if you want to step into a world where on any given moment, there's novelty, there's potential, there's possibility, there are amazing things that can either be created by you or that you can bump into and then recognize and be willing to say yes to. What we want to do is strike a balance between controlling a certain amount of things, but also almost intentionally holding a certain amount of things open to being uncertain. And instead of trying to lock down every variable in our lives, train in a set of practices and skills that would allow us to step into a place of sustained high stakes uncertainty without us melting down, without us falling apart, without the fight or flight response that gets triggered in us, and the sympathetic nervous system upregulation, the endocrine system pouring chemicals through our body that make us feel physically uneasy and unwell, and we want to run from it, right? We want to actually learn how to step into a place of uncertainty because that is also a place of possibility, and build the practices that allow us to be there, because nothing good ever happens in a lockdown life. Nothing good ever happens when 100% of your world, your day, your life is always fully in control, is always fully known. That means that you wake up literally every day and every part of what you want to do is known. So if you look at the research on work and some of the research on flow and the research on achievement and striving, like we know that we are at our happiest when we are striving towards something which is out there, right? We can all define that differently. But at the same time, if the thing that we're striving for, we know with 100% certainty we are going to get before we take this first step towards it, honestly, who cares? Do you anymore? Right? It is the taking of action. It is the risk. It is the exposure. It's the surrendering yourself to the unknown that makes anything that we achieve meaningful.
I just want to jump in here for a second, Jonathan, and say, you have such a, like so many folks who have written about ... right? It comes from a place of often of either I'm fascinated with it and I've never experienced it, right? Like I'm writing about happiness in some cases, I'm particularly not happy, or I am and I'm fascinated by it and I want to know. And so Jonathan has, and some of you may know this, has a really terrific story, terrifically scary and also terrifically applicable when it comes to uncertainty, right? And I don't want to prompt it, have to make you go through the whole 20-minute talk, but I wonder if you can share a few moments of that from that year about 19 years ago.
Yeah, that year.
Or anyone that you want to share. Jonathan's actually a very uncertain person. So, how about last week? How about last month? I have no idea. I'm uncertain about what he's going to say, but I
Yeah.
know that it's going to deal with
So let me give you a really granular, sort of like fixed thing, and then we'll like open it up big. So I'm sitting in front of two guitars right now. The one which is on my left over here, I built, right? I'd never built a guitar before. I'd always been jonesing to build a guitar. Like I worked with my hands in my past. I have no idea what I'm doing. So 2 years ago, I took a month off of my life and off of my work and drove out to Amish country, Pennsylvania, lived in a like little tiny road above a room above a roadhouse in, with cows all around us to work with a luthier, a guitar builder, so he could teach me how to build a guitar. Now, had I known before I actually did that, that I was going to go out there, it was going to 100% be a perfect experience. The instrument I built, I would be able to do it. It would work. Everything would go seamlessly. I would have been largely disinterested in doing it, right? I would walk away with a guitar and be like, oh, this met my expectations, right? The life that I want to live is not a life where it just meets my expectations when I wake up in the morning, right? What I want to do is I want possibility of things new and amazing, things that will fill my soul dropping in on a regular basis. So, but the thing that you're talking about happened in 2001. So I was living in a Hell's Kitchen, married with a 3-month-old baby, a new home. And I was walking down 9th Avenue and I saw a second floor picture window in the building, ran up to it, looked inside, and it was 2,000 square feet of pretty much a completely disaster of a space. And I had been in and out of the fitness world for a couple of years before that and had sold a business and was looking to explore the world of yoga and bringing a yoga studio to New York City. And this space was perfect. It was 3 blocks from my home. It needed a ton of work, but I was ready to do it. So I talked to the agent. We set a date. I went up to the top floor in a tower and we sat there and I signed a 6-year lease for a floor in a building in Manhattan. The date that I signed was September 10th, 2001. So we all know what happened the next day. I woke up, and already when you're starting a business, for anyone who's thought about it or done it, there is an astonishing amount of uncertainty involved in that. You enter it with a certain amount of things you think you know, a vastly larger amount of things that we call leaps of faith, or the business word for it is assumptions, because it sounds better than leaps of faith. And then over time, as you do it, the reality of your situation proves some right and proves some wrong. And hopefully you're right enough that you can keep it going. So without anything else going on, it is a massive step into the world of high stakes uncertainty to trying to open a business with a new home, married, and a 3-month-old baby. I did it the day before 9/11. So I was faced immediately with a choice. 2 things flood through my head when I wake up the next day and all of a sudden I see that the southern half of the city that it was my city is on fire. One is, did I know anyone? And I don't think I know anybody in New York City who didn't know somebody who never came home after that day. And I was one of those people. And the second question, once I sort of meandered my way out of that, was, what am I doing here? In the best possible circumstances, a lot of people would look at what I was up to and say, this is insane. Like, this is, you're putting so much at risk, right? And a lot of people also would look at that and say, well, okay, you haven't even started this yet. You just signed the lease yesterday. You need to just shut it down. And I considered it and I really thought about it. And within the next day or so, we actually realized that one of the people that we knew was in the 108th floor of one of the towers. And we got in the car, put our 3-month-old baby in a car seat, drove up to their house. They had a beautiful new 6,000 square foot house that they had just built. And his wife and 2.5-year-old son and 9-month-old baby were sitting there with a whole bunch of people waiting to see if they would hear from him again and if he would come home. And that evening, we watched everybody leave and we were the last people there. And so it was our friend, the wife, my wife and our baby and these 2 kids. And the 2 moms went upstairs to put down the 9-month-old and our friend said, hey, would you go upstairs and just read a story? to the 2.5-year-old. And it's like yesterday, I'm walking up the stairs and I open the door and I just see this kid sitting there, like tucked under his blanket with a book on his lap. And it's my job to make it okay. And I read the book and I was holding back emotion and tears, knowing the whole time, that I was sitting in, for those 10 minutes in this one particular role, but there may be other people sitting in that role for the rest of this kid's life or not. And as we drove home, and talking to my wife and really talking about just what we were feeling and just the deep, deep emotion. And if there was a time of high stakes uncertainty in New York City, that was the time where it was never higher. We didn't know if this was the first of many. We didn't know. It was madness on so many levels to go ahead with then putting our family at further risk by opening a business. But what I also realized was that my friend didn't go to work that morning expecting not to come home. And he was somebody who stepped out into the world and took, quote, risks. It would do things because it would create an amazing life filled with stories worth telling. And that was a kind of life that I had largely lived up to that point. And if anything really made me present to the moment that I had, the opportunity I had right now, it was that realization that anybody, we are not promised another minute, another hour, another day, another month, another year. And to lock the entire rest of your life down in, simply because you're afraid to step into a place that makes you uncomfortable. I could not stomach that. It just would not, it didn't sit as a life well lived to me. So as we came home, we made the decision, and I can't make that in a vacuum because I'm married with a child at that point. And we decided, we're going to push forward. And 8 weeks later, we opened this studio, and we had to, we did it very, very, very differently. And we were actually staged 2 avenue blocks away from one of the big piers where a lot of the aid workers, relief workers were being staged. And we just sent people down. We said, don't pay us, just come, move, breathe, meditate, cry, just be in a space of community with people. And that turned into, one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. It eventually turned into a very, successful, flourishing business, but it turned into a moment in time and a community that was stunning, and that touched my life and changed me forever. It touched the lives of tens of thousands of people who moved through there, of hundreds of teachers who we would train over the years, and those teachers who would go into their own communities and touch the lives of thousands of other people, and to know that I could come to this place of solace and other people could come and find a place where for just a moment in time, they would be okay, was really, really powerful. Had I come back home after that night and said to my wife, you know what? Stakes are high here. I am not going to do anything unless I am certain it's going to work. Game over. My life would be radically different. The quality of the experiences that I've had over the last 19 years would be radically different. And if you look at the ripple effect of what that community and all those teachers have created in the world, potentially the lives of hundreds of thousands of people would be different. Simply because on a car ride from Westchester back to New York City, I would have made a different decision. And when I think about that, it really brings me back to this idea of, yes, we can keep saying no because it makes us feel uncomfortable when we step into this place where we just don't know if it's going to work or not. We don't know how things are going to go. But when we do that, we may feel better for the moment, but we may also forsake an exponential volume of possibility and connection and impact in the name of wanting to feel a little bit better in the moment. Was that the story you were talking about, by the way?
Actually, I was thinking about the one from 2007 with the chocolate mousse and the
yeah, totally different
banana.
one.
But that one wasn't quite. That was much more meaningful than the one that I was thinking about.
Jonathan, that's a wonderful story and an experience to share and so much to digest. What I was thinking about was a lot of your story is putting yourself out there And right now,
Yeah.
we are all very much in here. And
you kept mentioning the word lockdown previously, and I was like, you mean like now? You mean like now? How about now? Anyone feeling this with me? Is it just me?
But I think the resonance is in the idea that I think even in this moment, I think there are possibilities for people.
Yeah, so let me speak directly to that because it's a really important distinction. You know, it's the choices you make when you are considering something that will proactively put you out into the world versus when circumstances that you feel are entirely beyond your control have basically raised the stakes higher than, you know, maybe they've ever been before. And that locus of control thing we were talking about, where you have a sense that you have the ability to affect the outcome. Sure, you know, like we're all doing the things that we think, you know, we should be doing and following the instructions to try and create that control that we can. But at the end of the day, there is still a lot of high level sustained uncertainty in the world around us. So that's where it really becomes important to go back to what we had spoken about earlier, which is, okay, so if I accept the fact that there are certain things, the world is the way it is right now, or my world is the way it is right now, you know, and it's going to be this way for an indeterminate amount of time. What is within my control, right? So if the circumstances largely are not within my control, what is within my control? And what is within my control is the ability to develop practices, skills, habits that will allow me to find more equanimity in this moment. And that's important in two levels, right? One is this moment has caused a huge amount of anxiety and fear in so many people, right? Probably rightly so for a lot of reasons. And what we know about anxiety is not only does it make us feel really bad, and I'm talking to you, Alan, who like knows this better than anyone on the planet, you know, this is so much of what your work is, you know, makes us feel bad, but it also from a cognitive and a creative level and a productivity level, it basically destroys you. You know, there's really powerful research showing an inverse relationship between anxiety, cognitive function, insight-based problem solving, and creativity. So when we're sitting here, and this happened, I'm hearing this so often, people are feeling really anxious and upset, and then they're having trouble thinking and solving problems and being creative, and then they're beating themselves up for not being able to function at the level that they could 3 months ago, which leads to more anxiety. It creates this awful spiral, right? Rather than doing that, if we actually know that there is this proven relationship, let me forgive the fact that in this moment in time, you know, like it may be a struggle to function the way I was functioning. And let me actually see, okay, so what can I do right now to dial back the emotional response to the volume of uncertainty that I cannot control right now, so that my brain can start to come into more of a down-regulated, more calm, relaxed, focused state, and know that, hey, I'm going to feel better just walking around day to day. You know, it's going to help me sleep better. It's going to help my relationships. And also the natural byproduct of that is that the quality of my thinking, the quality of my creativity, the quality of my problem solving will just organically start to come back to a certain extent. And I think that's a lot of the approach here. And once the other thing that happens is those same practices are practices that allow you to see more clearly the possibility that exists within a very narrow realm of your existence. So I have friends now. I have a friend who has 4 kids, right? And they live in a suburb. And on any given weekend, he and his wife spend the entirety of the weekend from 7 a.m. until 9 p.m. taking their kids all over the place. They're driving to like this league, this activity, this thing, this activity, crisscrossing, like tossing kids into cars. The kids never see each other for the entire weekend. The parents don't see each other during the week because they're working a lot, right? And the kids never play with each other anymore because they've got their own things. And over this window of time, all of a sudden, they're having family dinners again. The 2 adults are actually talking on a regular basis. The kids, you know, he's very fortunate. He has 4 kids. They have a self-contained play unit. The kids are out in the driveway playing together in a way they haven't for years and loving it. And they sit on the front step, like watching this and hearing the kids giggle and having coffee together in a way they never would have been able to because they would have been working outside of the house or schlepping the kids around to every possible thing. My friend was telling me, he said, you know what? He said, I almost hate to say this publicly. He said, I understand the fear and the pain and the suffering, and I acknowledge it in the world right now. And at the same time, when I really stop to pause and to see the possibility that's for deeper connection that's unfolding just within my own family, within the confines of my own home, I don't want it to end. And the thing that these same practices that allow you to come down a little bit and function better are also the very same practices that allow you to see more clearly the truth of your circumstance and to see possibility that before this moment, most of us just didn't have the capacity to see.
I'm really curious for the people who are on the call right now, what possibilities other people have seen.
Yeah.
Have other people experienced this? I mean, I think Dan and I, go on, Dan.
I was going to say that. And also, Jonathan, you mentioned sort of part one of that answer was, what there might be few and far between, but what do we have control over right now? Is there something, whether it's possibilities that you're experiencing, and also what have you found that you have control over that is being helpful for you? Right? Is it a practice? Is it a process?
Wow, a new experience of time.
Right? Yeah, can I, Linda, thank you for sharing that. I have had so many conversations about this over the last month. It's been really fascinating to see how people are understanding, experiencing, and using time very differently. It's been really fascinating to sort of have those conversations.
A lot of people are saying time here. It's really interesting, right? It's funny because, Jonathan, you and I had a conversation maybe 2-3 weeks ago, and I won't give it word for word, but basically it was one of a number of conversations I'd had that week. And the way I describe it is I talked to 3 or 4 people that week who are the most productive people I know in the world. Yes, Jonathan, I include you in that group, although I don't know many people, so take it for what you will. But incredibly productive people. And the theme was, yeah, I've kind of given up on 80% of my brain right now. Like my time is not my own right now. I need to structure it. Time is flying by, or time seems like everyone's kind of this warped sense of time. And so whether people were super productive or they were less so, there was just this, what is this all about? And yet in the last few weeks, and it seems to be emerging right now for some of these great responses, past few weeks have been, I feel like I'm a little bit more control of my time. Like either I'm making more time for my family, or I've developed a practice in this way, or I've developed a way to structure my day that makes more sense for me. By the way, so I saw a statistic just the other day where the average work week for people in the last, I think 2 to 3 weeks is 2 hours. Average work day is 2 hours longer, right? So we're sitting here thinking, what am I doing? And all of a sudden it's 7:30. Like, why haven't I seen my kid? Right? How'd that happen? This kind of time warp. And yet we start to be getting control, as people are indicating here, in so many different ways.
Yeah, and I think there's also something interesting happening with time, which revolves around a sense of forgiveness. When we hit a point where we realize, okay, so I'm not functioning the way that I thought I was going to be able to by just like switching environments, but being the exact same person. And people tend to grapple with that briefly. If you can say, and that's okay right now, grieve it, as much as you want to grieve it, and then just say like, okay, so let me just do what I can do, and know that this is a window in time. This is a short season that we will step out of, but at the same time, breathe a little bit more deeply. Slow. If the world is making you slow down, allow yourself to slow down. If the world is giving you a chance to sit in front of a window because you just can't focus and look out it, well, then what would happen if you actually allowed yourself to be there rather than felt like you futilely had to be there? What would happen if you actually just sat there and said, you know what? I can smell the grass. What if you could actually sort of like look at the people in windows across from you, or, we're having the most bizarre experience in New York City right now, which is when you open the windows, there are these like crazy things that you hear. They're like animals that I'm told are called birds. And you can actually hear them, because I just sat there and I slowed down. I said, like, this is okay. So if this is me for this window of time, and the world is telling me my job is to slow down because I can't not, where is the grace? Where is the invitation within this particular moment? What can I step into? Because it's there. It's always there.
What can help us get there? Because, Julian Walker just mentioned that everyone's dealing with similar issues right now is allowing me to be more self-forgiving. And in our course, we've always said that one of the key themes is you're not alone. So if a college student feels stressed out, when they see 90% of their classmates raise their hand when we ask who has been stressed out, they're like, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one. And so it's this interesting challenge where on the one hand, things you're saying make so much sense. And on the other hand, as Julie's saying, knowing that everyone's dealing with this is helpful. And yet we're all inside, right? So if we're all sitting at our windows, unless we see someone across the way sitting at their windows, what are good ways to get into this practice knowing, oh, it's okay. Oh, here's a step or two I can take.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a huge normalizing effect around uncertainty. So what we know is that when you feel like you're isolated, when you're experiencing uncertainty and that's leading to anxiety and fear, and you feel like you're the only one feeling it, it's can be relatively devastating. When you feel like you're actually like that experience is being shared with pretty much everyone that you're not only not alone in it, but that is the new normal for everybody. There's a normalizing experience that goes with it that actually dials down the fear and anxiety we feel, because we are no longer the weirdo who's feeling differently than we're supposed to feel, which is the way that everybody else feels. Everybody else is feeling this too. So it's like, oh, so I'm actually kind of supposed to feel this way. That means there's nothing wrong with me. So all the stuff that spirals the anxiety and fear into a worse or bigger pit of despair, I can let go of and just sort of like be at that baseline with everyone else. It's a really powerful normalizing experience. So what can you do? And this is what so many people have been doing. I've been FaceTiming my mom and my sister like I have never done before. I've been in community.
You FaceTime your mom and sister? That might be a little bit intrusive, but if you could share their information here, I'm sure they'd love it.
He didn't say they want me to FaceTime them. I just have been. No. So what do you see people doing? What's the natural response? It's what we're doing right now. Of the 300 million people that have now flocked to Zoom, sure, some of it is for work, some of it is for education, but a huge amount of that is because people want to be in community as they move through this. And part of that is because we feel better in community. But part of it is because when we are regularly interacting, even virtually, with people who we know are going through the same general circumstance, which is so rare in this world, it normalizes the experience for us. And we not only feel better because we're more connected, we feel better because we feel more normal in our new abnormal together. So being very proactive about reconnecting, not just because it's a great opportunity for you to rekindle and deepen relationships, but because it does have this effect. It reminds you that you're not out there alone and that this is actually the way that everybody's feeling. And it's actually normal to feel this way. It can really help a lot. In terms of bigger picture tools for all of this stuff, I'm sure it's a lot of stuff that people in the weeks that have preceded me here have talked about, and like that will follow, will talk about. It's a lot of the basic tools that revolve around PERMA and sort of like how do we cultivate those different states. But fundamentally, the tools that really get me there are I'll give you one intervention-based tool.
But by the way, I just want to jump in really quickly for folks who haven't been on, or PERMA is an acronym. It's Martin Seligman's acronym for well-being. He's a renowned psychologist. It stands for positive emotion, engagement. The R is for positive relationships, M is for meaning, and A is for accomplishment. The idea is to have a drop in each of these buckets is essential for well-being. Go.
Yes, thank you. So let me talk about two things that are really important in my life right now, and also because I have a lifelong habit of creating long-term sustained high stakes uncertainty in the name of wanting to do big things. So one is a practice, which we all know, and I'll call it mindset training. You can call it attentional training. You can call it meditation. You can call it mindfulness. You can call it all these different things. But fundamentally, it's a practice that works best every day. That is, it equips you with a couple of different skills. One is the ability to identify what you're thinking about when you're thinking about it. So to become aware of what you're aware of at any given moment in time is maybe the single biggest master skill that anybody can have to live a better life, and also to find equanimity in the face of uncertainty. And mindfulness-based meditation or mindfulness-based practices get you there. You know, it's a combination of cultivating this meta-awareness, dropping thoughts or storylines that are destructive rather than constructive, and then reorienting towards something which brings you back to a grounded place. So when you do this, you know, for me, it's a breath-oriented practice. So every morning I wake up and I do a breath-oriented practice where I allow my mind to go to my breath. And a lot of people struggle with this. So you can actually, what I'll sometimes do is put a hand on my chest and a hand on my abdomen, so I can feel the physical sensation of my chest and my abdomen moving, so that even if I can't necessarily hear my breath, if it's very calm, or if I can't feel the sensation of cooling as I inhale and warming as I exhale through my nose, I can feel my hands pushing out and then relaxing in, and allow my mind to move to that. Now, within a half a second, I'm spinning somewhere else. And here's where the real magic happens. When you start this practice, it probably takes the entirety of your, like sit to realize your mind is somewhere else. But over time, what starts to happen is you start to catch yourself. You're like, oh, I was just over here. And I wanted to be back here. And you forgive yourself. And you can even use the word, label it thinking or feeling, right? And then you actively say, I'm just going to bring myself back here. Now, I've heard the practice described as actively letting it go. I don't know how to actively stop doing something. I do know how to actively bring myself back to something, right? So, I think it's a distinction, because a lot of people will beat themselves up for it, but I couldn't just let it pass by. But I can say, oh, back to my breath, right? That I found to be much more effective for me over the years. And then it's a practice of doing that over and over and over and over. Now, the benefit of this, Alan knows this, of course, and you know this, I'm sure so many other people who've done the research, there's a large body of research on this type of practice now that shows all sorts of effects from, like improved performance type of metrics to improved health outcomes, but also to reductions in anxiety and all sorts of things that we struggle with in the world of mental health. The one proviso is it is not an intervention. Like, this is not a practice that tends to make you feel better the first time or the second time or the first month or the second month. This is a practice that builds over time, both as a seeding practice, but also it starts to ingrain the skills of when you're just moving through your day and your mind is spinning. Oh my God, the world is just crazy. I don't know what's coming next. I'm anxious. I don't know what's happening here, right? It gives you the ability to stop, like, at 3:22 in the afternoon, be like, oh, my mind is over here. That's actually really destructive, and there's nothing that I can do about the circumstances I'm spinning about. Let me just come back to something. Let me come back to my breath. Let me come back to the things that I can actually make good. So it radiates out from the actual seated practice, and over a window of time, it actually, you develop these skills to train in the alchemy of fear and uncertainty.
It's interesting because we started with uncertainty and your earlier book, Uncertainty, and then you went to how to live a good life. And, we talk about PERMA and positive emotions, and you touched on relationships. And it almost seems like uncertainty, the most direct link when it comes to well-being would be something like mindfulness. The ability to go, okay, I know that things are uncertain. What is the one thing I can control? Clearly, relationships are, help us address these things. And as, Evelyn just wrote, the ability of joy and laughter is so important. Everyone's going to have they're going to feel more closely aligned with different elements of well-being. but mindfulness practice, I'm so glad you brought it up, in part because some of the earlier questions about what's the science behind this. And we certainly have science behind positive emotions and meaning, and others, as we found out last week with Emily talking about meaning and relationships in a big way. The body of research on mindfulness seems to bring that stress, that anxiety that comes with uncertainty, and allows us to handle it almost very, very sort of head on.
Yeah, and also I think mindfulness is a practice. Mindfulness is a tool in a toolbox, but the state that we're trying to reach, or the master skill that we're working to cultivate, is the ability to, at any given moment, become aware of where our mind is. That is the master. If you want the master skill of coming back from a really dark place, if you want the master skill of flourishing in every part of your life, in my mind, there is no bigger unlock key, right? Because we can't control, we cannot do anything willfully or intentionally. A good life is an intentional life, fundamentally, right? It's not a life that is surrendered to the fates. It's an intentional life. We cannot be intentional about any part of our lives, whether it's trying to find a way back from a dark place or blaze a path to a light place, right? We cannot be intentional in our actions and our decisions to do either of those things until we have at least a baseline level of awareness about where our mind is at any given moment in time. So being intentional is sort of like the state we want to be in, being present and intentional, but being aware of whether we are actually present and intentional and what we're present to. That is the master skill for everything in my mind. And like meditation or mindfulness is one path in. There's some really fascinating, more recent research on another path. So if anybody has ever done any kind of yoga, safe bet at some point in the class, you have chanted. Maybe you've done actually more involved chanting, but pretty safe bet that you're probably at least going to chant Om, right? And it, there's all sorts of different reasons why people offer that you would chant in a class. And some is it's a devotional practice, it's the sonic, aspect of it. But there's really interesting research that actually compared 3 minutes of chanting, they call it toning in the literature, not chanting, against mindfulness. And then a control group that basically just sat there and twiddled their thumbs for 3 minutes. What they found was that the physiological and psychological changes that happened from simply toning were equal, if not stronger, than those that came from a mindfulness practice. And they were way easier for the average person to access. And they tended to be more sustained. So does that mean that we all have to start chanting in Sanskrit? No, right? But it does mean that we can find the thing that we can repeat to ourselves. And there's a sort of vibration, and there's there are a lot of different theories around why this works. Some of it is related to the vagus nerve and sort of like stimulation of that, which helps to mediate, your nervous system. I don't know the mechanism. I don't know if anybody has really keyed in on it in a specific way, but they know the effect. Like maybe you guys actually know some of the research behind that more.
Well, people have been looking at singing for a very long time because it's a way of developing some control over your breath.
Yeah, and that goes to the other thing that I was going to say in terms of an interventional based practice. That is my intervention. My entry to yoga actually was I have a very past life as a lawyer, and I was in a large firm in Manhattan with very high stakes deals and insane deadlines. And
this is where all yogis come from.
Right, exactly. And I was struggling to make it through every day. And so I started looking at yoga, and I loved the movement practice, but I also got exposed. There's a whole domain of practice in the world of yoga, which is called pranayama, which is basically, it's just breathing exercises. Yeah. And now we know the breathing exercises actually are maybe the most direct regulator of your nervous system. So, and the fastest and the most rapid. So for me, I started studying breathing exercises because I wanted to know how to very quickly, when I was on a call that was insane and I was being barked at and screamed at and the stakes were high. I literally remember people in another country screaming, the tanks are going to roll. We need to close this or else lives are going to end. And I'm in a room feeling like I can't handle this. So I learned breathing exercise that allowed me to really rapidly downregulate my response, my emotional and neurological response, so I could just be calm. And those have become central to my daily practice. So every morning I have a pranayama practice now and a mindfulness practice. And if I'm getting nervous or anxious or upset or fearful in any given moment, I know that my breathing can actually very rapidly bring me down. It may not cure everything, or it's not going to change the circumstance, but it'll bring me back to a place where I'm okay. And I can think more clearly about the appropriate way to not react, but to respond intentionally.
I'm sorry, I thought you were going to say that when Alan mentioned singing, that you took up singing. And I was hoping that we'd be able to hear something. Alan actually sings on a regular basis to our class, and I find that it calms him down and calms them down. Would you like to give us a little?
It can happen at any moment.
It's true.
You never know.
It's usually musical theater too.
Speaking of singing and meditation, I think for those on the call who might be thinking, I could never meditate, I always like to say meditation might not be for you, but it's for a lot more people than know it. And the same thing is true for singing. When people say to me, I don't sing, 100 years ago, it was the only way we had fun. At the end of the day, it was like, hey, what are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to sing with my family. Oh, that's great. Of course, that's what you're going to do.
And there's nothing else to do. I can't afford anything else, and there's no television. That was actually the most common answer. Television hasn't been invented yet, and I can't afford anything, so I'm going to sing now.
When people say, I don't sing, I just can't sing, it's like saying, I don't walk. I used to walk, but then I was like, I'm terrible at walking. I stopped walking. And what would you do? So everyone on this call can sing. And singing will make you feel good. The reason I love to sing is because it makes me feel good. The reason I like to meditate is it brings me joy. And it also helps me in those difficult times.
Well, there's so many different pathways in, right? I mean, Alan used to share that, that square dancing, is one of the most joyous things you can do because you're dancing with other people in a way that requires minimal skill. And it's just fun. There's no sad square dancing. And yet it's funny because, my little boy the other day, he was in bed and he's feeling sad. And he said, why do I feel sad? He's 12 years old. I'll tell you why. Puberty. But, sadness comes. What do I do about it? I said, there are songs that are written that are sad songs. And he thought I was like what? And I was like, started ticking them off. He's like, that's right. I said, they're there for a reason because we can express ourselves and we're still singing. It doesn't have to be a joyous thing. It could be a sad thing. And yet there's something about it that connects us, right? And it could be dancing. And it could be, and if it's not your singing, it could be listening to music. It could be looking at art. There's so many different ways in. And, to Jonathan's point, that ability to, what is it that's going to keep your attention in a certain way? I mean, William James said 150 years ago, that is the greatest education we could get is the education that allows us to focus our attention. That would be the master of ourselves. I have trouble meditating. I can listen to a piece of music for hours, especially certain music, certain classical pieces, for example. I can read certain poetry. Other people be like, poetry, schmoetry. What's the thing for you that's going to allow you to become engaged?
But here's the thing. You said you have trouble meditating. No, you don't. You just described the state that you access through music is the identical state.
The traditional way of thinking about meditation.
That's why I think it's really important not to get caught up in the mechanism, but to actually focus on the end state or like the state we transition in and out of, which is present and aware.
Right.
That's all we're trying to go for. Like
I wasn't talking about Alan, for the record.
It's a family of techniques. It's a family of techniques, and it's about you. Think about a family. Family's got a lot of different components and dysfunctional people and everything, and it's whatever technique you find that helps you address it.
Yeah, I mean, think about when I think about anxiety and fear, which is generally the response to high stakes uncertainty. I look at those as anticipatory emotions, right? You cannot experience them if your awareness is focused on the present moment, right? They're concerns which are rooted in what might or might not happen in a time which is not now, right? The more you gain the capacity to be here now, sound like Ram Dass, right? The more you gain that capacity, and the more you can fill your sort of psychic space with that experience, the less room there is to be out there anticipating something.
Right.
So it's just, and I think that's the beauty of constantly coming back to like, but what about now? And that's literally like, it's a walking around daily practice for me at this point. It's like, if I'm spinning off about something, I'll literally say to myself, but what about now? Am I safe now? Am I breathing now? Am I okay now? Am I loved and like in a place where I can love now? Am I, and that will, that is a practice also. So I think it's really, a really, really healthy approach is to sort of say, okay, I have two drawers in my toolbox. One drawer is a set of practices that over time will allow me to start to experience the world differently. The other drawer is a set of practices that can help me in a moment in time just get back to a baseline state where I'm a little more okay, where there's still uncertainty. The stakes are still high, and yet I'm in a space where I'm breathing all right. I'm not amplified, and I'm calm enough that I can start to see beyond the spin cycle of despair, and I can start to see the grace, the beauty, the opportunities, the possibility, even if they're microscopic, that are right in front of me, and I can start to play with that a little bit.
That's beautifully said, Jonathan.
Thank
A
you.
wonderful way to wrap up, I think, everything we've talked about tonight.
Yeah, that's true. It's been. Thank you for opening up so much possibility in so many ways to opening up the interpretation of and understanding of what mindfulness, meditation, attention can be, and also really giving us a sense, hopefully, for folks about what uncertainty can mean, how we can address it, actually how we can kind of turn it on its head to see the possibility. And you kicked off that way too, which I really appreciate. So thank you. Now listen, I'm not going to say goodbye yet, in part because we need to mention that Jonathan is he's one in a long line of remarkable people in general, but particularly here on the Happiest Hour. So next week we get to welcome, speaking of possibility and the challenges of uncertainty, we're welcoming a fella who's going to be talking all about stress. And that is our very dear friend, Dr. Jonathan Fader. Jonathan, or he insists on being called Fader. I've known him for a long time. He still insists on being called Fader. He's a former sports psychologist for the Mets and the Giants. But since then, he has segued into working with lots of different folks from New York City Ballet to individuals. And it really is a question of, what do we do with stress? How do we make the most of stress? How do we handle it in a healthy way in order to kind of give us advantages and understand it as well? So we look forward to welcoming him next week. After this episode is done, on the screen, you'll be able to register. You can also go to thehappiesthour.org and register at any point in time, where you can also donate to No Kid Hungry if you are able to, and we encourage that. So thank you, Jonathan, for joining us today. Where can people find you, by the way, if they want to find out more?
Probably the best place is just goodlifeproject.com, or check out the podcast, Good Life Project.
All right, wonderful. It is a wonderful, wonderful podcast, and the books are super, and you're a terrific guy. I should say, thank you.
Hey.
And thank you to everybody for joining us, Happiest Hour Live, where no matter where you are right now, if things are wonderful, if things are challenging, every week to strive to make your life just a little bit better. Have a happier week, everybody. We look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Thank you, Jonathan.
My pleasure. Thanks.